There are two primary reasons that lead to leadership breakdowns. These two factors are repetitive and normal, and if you don't break out of these two factors, you are doomed to over and over experience leadership breakdowns. One is ignorance and one is fear. Ignorance is not stupidity, it's just lack of information. And fear isn't really cowardice, it is over-indexing safety. Now we can deal with ignorance. We will be dealing with it. This is what this program is about, giving you ideas and tools and skills and models. But we have to deal with fear. Because if we don't deal with fear, then we can never really shift from knowing more about leadership to doing something differently about leadership. And that gap between knowing and doing is really the gap of transformation. Transformation means a noticeable change in something. And why don't we change? It's not for lack of knowledge. It's fear. And fear is always rooted in the ego. The ego is not a bad thing. I mean, you hear us say he's an egomaniac, or she has such a big ego, or, that ego is out of control. So it's got a real negative vibe. Overused, it is definitely a problem. But the ego is our basic sense of self. There ain't no functioning person without an ego. So the issue is, how do we get it under control? How do we understand it? You have to have an ego because that's just part of being a human being. As a matter of fact, it's your sense of self, the identity, what we relate to as a person. So leadership is a relational competency. So the issue isn't about getting rid of the ego in order to not have fear. The issue is really understanding the ego so that you can be more courageous and therefore more conscious. So the ego has three elements or three functions. One is that it is the method of identity, right? I am. Ego literally is a Latin word for I. The ego, I, my identity, my beliefs, my expectations, my opinions, my preferences, my style. That's all part of the ego identity. So that's identity. Two, the ego is there to protect. To protect what? Fundamentally, to protect the body. But if you're watching this video, I seriously doubt that you're in physical danger. So it's protecting the sense of identity. It's protecting our psychology, protecting our emotions. So that's the second part. And the third part is it's there to mediate. It's actually the way that we exchange relationship and connect with people. But the whole thing is wrapped around this notion of safety. Safety, why? Because the basic mood of the ego is fear. And so we cannot actually have a meaningful conversation about effective leadership, about conscious leadership. We can't really walk away from the causes of constant leadership breakdowns if we don't address fear. Fear of heights, fear of the dark, fear of sharks, fear of clowns. And there's all these, we're creative in terms of all the stuff that we're afraid of. What's relevant are the fears that get in the way of our ability to really engage, connect, and meaningfully influence people as a leader. The fears of I will be minimized, the fear that if I do this wrong, I will lose my job, the fear that if I say this in the meeting, I'm going to look stupid, the fear that if I hire the wrong person, this project's going to go south and I'm not going to be promoted, the fear that if I fail at doing this, I'm abdicating my responsibility and people will suffer, the fear that I'm not able to be creative enough and therefore people are not going to believe my capacity and they'll think that I'm stupid and I'll be fired. These various fears that are important in the workplace that get in the way of leadership really boil down to three primary fears. Three primary, like red, green, and blue. We have these three primary fears and every human being experiences them. This is part of, what it means to be a human. It's part of what it means to grow up. It's part of what it means to live. You can't get away from it. They're elemental fears, but they get in the way of your ability to really be creative and influential. These are the very fears that get in this gap that I talked between knowing and doing. The transformation is held back by the fear, and they're not going to go away. I don't have an experience of getting rid of these fears. I have them, but there's a way that you can manage them. There's a way that you can cultivate more courage. So what are these three basic fears? There's the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, and the fear of humiliation. In the fear of failure, really, I'm terrified that I'm going to lose control. I'm not going to be able to affect something and things will go sideways. Every single leader that I've ever talked to over the past 20 years of doing all this leadership development and executive coaching has a real intimate experience of the fear of failure. It's real for all of us. Fear of rejection is this fear that we are going to be pushed out from the in-group, that we are going to be excluded, pushed away, not relevant, not appreciated, not powerful. That's the fear of rejection. And the fear of humiliation is this abiding fear that we have that we're not going to be able to show our real skills, talents, and power. So the fear of humiliation is I'm going to look stupid. They're going to think that I'm basically sort of worthless. So in essence, there are three things that the ego wants at the cost of almost anything. The ego wants to be right, to be liked, and to have might. That's the whole structure. That's the elemental structure. We want to be liked, right? Connect with me, like me. If you don't like me, I'm afraid that I'll be rejected. We want to have might. We want to have some power and control. If I don't, then I'm going to fail. And we want to be right. I want to show you that I'm smart, that I'm competent, and I'm capable. So for example, you're sitting in a meeting and you want to say something, but you're not saying it. You're a leader in the room and you're not saying what you're saying. Why are you not saying it? There's not one reason. There's at least three reasons. If you're not saying what you're not saying because you have the need to be right, and you think that if you say it, you're going to be wrong and people are going to think you're stupid, that's the fear of humiliation. If you're sitting in the room and you want to say something but you're not saying it, your ego literally is holding you back from saying it because you think that if you say it, people will disagree with you and they'll find you disagreeable and reject you. Then that's the fear of rejection and the need to be liked. Or if you're sitting in that room and you have something to say and you're not saying it because you think that if you add it to the if you contribute that to the conversation, it'll actually go sideways and you'll fail. That's the need to have might, the fear of failure. Different people might have different reasons not to say something, but the reason is always the same. It's the ego. And at the heart of that ego is fear. And so we have to understand, you have to understand, we have to cultivate a collective capacity to have more courage.